Acts 17 is where we're going to be today. If you're not familiar with where that's at, just keep flipping right for a while, and you'll find it after Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We've been in there 30 weeks now, and man, what we've seen is the good news that Jesus has died for sin. He has defeated the grave, and that good news is spreading all over the Roman Empire. It is broken out of the localized Jewish capital. It is pushed through all kinds of political, racial, gender, social barriers. And why? Simply because Jesus' followers cannot help but radiate the gospel. He is just too good. He's too good. And so, essentially, his followers saying, I can't hold this inside, right? If he's worth worshiping, then he's worth witnessing to. It's that simple, right? And so, as that's happening, despite all the opposition that we've seen come out of the church, it's being established across the globe, and we've just seen the church now spread to the continent of Europe, where we find our boy today, Paul, in this epic moment in the Bible, Acts 17, a real high point as the gospel is going to collide with cultural elites. And so, 2020, I know, can be called a lot of things. We've seen a lot of things happen this year, but among all those things, one thing that we could probably call 2020 is the age of delivery, okay? We've got DoorDash, we've got Postmates, we've got Shipt, Grubhub, Porch Pooch, whatever you call it. That's not one, by the way, I just made that up. And already as a society, before the last 2 months quarantine, we were already moving that way anyways, right? And now the quarantine just kind of pushed us over the cliff. So anything, obviously food, but besides food, in a moment you can order laundry, you can order a date night in a box, you can order a mattress, a toilet, a pet, anything that can fit in a box. It can be dropped at your doorstep, all without ever even having to get out of your Snuggie, right? In fact, Amazon Prime will deliver it to you in a matter of just, a couple minutes after you click buy, right? Before you even close your phone. And so that's where we're at basically as a society right now. We want to be met where we're at. And if only someone could come to me. And so I don't know where you're at specifically today. I know where many of you are, but I know that some of you are probably coming with some questions about Jesus, whether you're outside the faith and you're skeptical, or whether you're inside and you're just being plagued by doubt. Maybe that's where you're at. Maybe you are frustrated with the church and you've had experiences that have left wounds. You've read headlines that have caused frustration. By the way, me too. Maybe you're straight up lonely. Maybe you desperately need friendship. Maybe you need community and relationship. Maybe you're battling addictions, right? And you just can't seem to overcome them, or you're drowning in anxiety and depression. Maybe you're like me, you're exhausted and you need rest. Maybe the fire of your love has just simply grown cold as you feel flat, as you lack motivation to pursue the Lord, but you're still showing up to church because that's what you're supposed to do, but really there's no delight and joy and fire there because God just feels distant. He doesn't feel like a close father. He feels like an unengaged, absent father, that maybe he's in charge, but where is he? Maybe all those things aren't true, and you are here with us today, and where you're at with the Lord is a place where you're stable and solid, and your heart is warmed by the fire of what Christ has done for you. And you're walking in peace, and you're buoyed with joy in Him, and you're living a life that's loving others. Wherever you're at today, the reality is that God wants to meet you. He's here to speak to you on your level with truth delivered to your door, and then take it a step further, motivate and enable you to go meet others where they're at too. That's exactly what Paul does in Athens, we're going to see today from Acts 17. So as we take a look at how it goes down, I want to just point out, as we walk through the passage, 7 specific things about the passage, okay? And I don't have slides for you. Obviously now we're doing it this way, so I'm sorry about that. You'll have to roll with me. Acts chapter 17, let's start in verse 16. Now, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw the city was full of idols. Okay, so In his itinerary, Paul had just been fled from Berea. He was under the cover of night, escaped, and he's been dropped off in Athens by himself. And what a city to be in. This is the epicenter of Greek culture in the day. This is a proud elite city where the headquarters of philosophy were. You've got Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, all came from right here. I mean, this is the intelligentsia metropolis of the empire. And with it, you've got, literature, human liberty, democracy, all these things. But you've got really this culture of art where there's just beauty and there's magnificent architecture everywhere. You've got a theater and a stadium. You've got the Acropolis. Like, just Google ancient Athens and tons of buildings begin to come up. Most of them were religious, right? Like, the Parthenon. There's statues and temples to God everywhere. And in fact, there was a saying in Athens where it says that people would say it's easier to find a god in Athens than a person. And so Paul says, as he's observing and seeing the city, that it's full of idols, literally smothered in idols. It was just a forest of these counterfeits. And so you've got a city that's aesthetically brilliant, it's culturally sophisticated, it's religiously devoted, but it's deceived. And while he's there waiting on his boys, Silas and Timothy, to show up, he's in one of the most prestigious cities on the planet. He's not on vacation. He doesn't kick back at the hotel and enjoy some R&R. And trust me, if anyone does at this point, it's Paul, right? He's been beat to pieces. He's been hunted. Like, can we get the boy a day at the spa or something, please? But to Paul, no, all of life has purpose and has mission, even the waiting time. And so he's people watching. And he's culture learning. And so look down in verse 22 and 23. Men of Athens, he says, I perceive that in every way you're very religious, for as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship. See those words there. He observed, he perceived. As he's strolling the city, he's not mesmerized by the sights. He's not just a tourist. He's mentally alert. And so the polished gold, the marble statues, none of that impressed him. He saw past the outward beauty into what's really underneath in the city, right? And so, catch this, he's not just absorbing culture. He's evaluating it. He's not blindly accepting things that he sees, but his eyes spiritually are wide open to critically appraise things. What about us? Is that true when we head to the gym? Or we sit at a football game, or we stroll through that store? Are we spiritually alert? When we read the news, or we turn on Netflix, do we see past the outer shell of our country and our city into the idols that are underneath? Do we see even the idols of our own family and our neighbors and our friends? And more importantly, do we even see our own idols in our own hearts? Or are we a mere tourist? Paul was not a tourist. And so he knew what was being worshipped. But number two, he was also provoked. He didn't just see something, he felt something. Do you know this feeling? It's the feeling to be unsettled, to know that something isn't right, like you're disturbed and pricked on the inside. Maybe you felt it when you've seen someone who's handicapped be made fun of. Or you've seen women demeaned in the workplace. Maybe you felt it when you've thought about abortion or human trafficking, or you've heard some obscene language. It's that feeling where your soul is just deeply revolting inside of you. I felt it last week when I watched the video of Ahmaud Arbery being murdered. I hope you did too when you watched that. And we have to pay attention to what we feel. It shows a lot. What do you feel when you walk into a casino? Or you witness a racy ad, or you watch the Oscars? Do you feel admiration? Do you feel intrigue? Do you feel heartbreak? Are you provoked? It's a word of really being deeply troubled, and it's an Old Testament word that God used of himself when he saw the idolatry of the Israelites. He would be provoked. It's a mix of anger, of grief, and of indignation. Like, it's the jealous love of God being aroused with a deep stirring for him to receive the honor that he is worthy of. And so Paul feels this, and it's not just a quick emotional outburst. an outrage. It's a settled, kind of continuous distress that moves him to action. Okay, well, what kind of action? Does he throw his hands up in despair? Does he leave the city in frustration? No. Does he curse them? Does he resort to violence? Does he go back to his hotel and start banging out angry blog posts? Is that his strategy? No. No, that's not where Paul goes. We're going to see that he actually holds out the gospel to these people. Well, how does he do that if he's stirred to anger on the inside of him? Well, we got to understand this anger arises out of love. This is, yes, a zeal for God's glory, but it's mixing with a compassion for people's ignorance and sin. Like he feels deep concern for the Athenians' souls, their joy, their eternity. And it motivates him to mission. John Piper says famously, right, that missions exist because worship doesn't. People don't worship the God who made them. And so this should both anger us and it should also grieve us. We're angry over their action, but we're grieved over their condition. Catch that. Let me say that again. We're angry over their action, but we're grieved over their condition, and we have to have both. This is so vital. If you only have one, or certainly if you have none, you will not effectively minister to people. We have to have a righteous fire over sin, but a broken-hearted love for the sinner. Those things go hand in hand, and Paul did. And because he saw this, and because he felt this, then look at what he did in verse 17. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Okay, interesting. So he goes to the synagogue where the religious Jews were, but he doesn't stop there. He also goes to the marketplace, like the center of public life. This is the 19th street of Athens. This is Bricktown. This is Campus Corner, Classen Curve, Penn Square, Scissortail Park, you name it. This is that of Athens. This is where people mix it up, and he is there. He doesn't hide out in his hotel, right? And he doesn't stay in the synagogue. That's what Christians don't do. Christians don't run from the battle. Nor do we sit back and launch arrows from a distance. No, we go into the fray to be a part of rescuing people. What a thought. It's almost like Jesus did that or something. And so we don't retreat from culture. That's not what Jesus did. We engage it. And that means you and me, everything from bars to bowling alleys, from coffee shops to farmers markets, from tailgates to the lake, that we are mixing it up with people with a steady resolve of love for whoever we encounter. That's what Paul's doing. And notice he doesn't only go to them, but he talks with them, not at them. It says he reasoned, and it says he conversed. So there's a dialogue. Remember that word? We saw it a few weeks ago in Greek. It's a dialogue that he's having. There's a patient persuasion going on here. He's not shoving things down their throat, but he's discussing with reason. It reminds me of a guy named Ravi Zacharias. Maybe you guys have heard his name pop up a lot in the last few weeks. His health is declining, but what a absolute stud in the faith. This guy who is just brilliantly minded. He has this deep academic wit and knowledge, but he combines that with a gentleness and grace. Like, if you ever seen him in university settings and in these platforms that are so hostile, he conducts himself with just an amazing balance of those things. A tenacious thinker and yet a compassionate care. Man, what a dynamic duo. And that is the duo we see in Paul. What about us? Are we striving to hold both of those in tandem together? Well, as he does, verse 18, he catches the attention of some philosophers, right? Two very different schools of thoughts, the Epicureans and the Stoics. Well, first, real quick, Epicureans believed that the Greek gods were distant. They had no interest and influence in any of human life, and so we should just avoid pain, pursue pleasure, because there's no afterlife, no judgment. Basically, get all you can out of this life. YOLO, all right? That's the Epicureans. Then you have the Stoics on the opposite side, where really humans must pursue duty. It was up to us to develop their own self-sufficiency, and they were high on discipline, okay? Your goal is to be unfazed by anything, to not be seduced into pleasure and to not be bothered by pain, okay? So think Spock, or if that's not your genre, think Jack Bauer. That's where my mind goes, okay? So you've got both of these in society, and what do they say about Paul as he's mixing it up with them? What does this babbler wish to say? Which is totally a derogatory, it's slang for a derogatory term. Like, this dude has no original thoughts, is what they're trying to say. So they're throwing shade as much as nerds can throw shade, they're throwing it, okay? What does babbler wish to say? Others said he seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities. Why? Because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. He was gospeling them. I love this. This is the central content of Paul always, right? And so what ends up happening, we move to verse 19, is that people are intrigued as he lays out the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. They took him and they brought him to the Areopagus, saying, may we know what this new teaching is that you're presenting, for you bring some strange things to our ears, and we want to therefore know what these things mean. Now, verse 21, we get this parentheses, very interesting from Luke. Now, all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling and hearing something new. They were addicted to new. They spend their time every day sitting around chopping up these ideas like true philosophers do, right? Chasing knowledge. And particularly, they were attracted to anything that was new. Now, thankfully, in 2020, we're far more advanced than that, right? We are not addicted to things that are new at all, are we? No, especially not in 2020 as we're Googling the iPhone 12 on the side here, right? When's that bad boy coming out? No, of course we are, right? We have not advanced one bit. And the addiction to new only displays to us that we are desperately searching. What's the latest? What's the greatest idea? And that's where these philosophers are. Okay, let's hear this guy out. Let's move him to the Areopagus. After he's shared many days faithfully with people, he gets kind of promoted to this huge platform. Now, if you're familiar with Greek culture at all, Areopagus, it means Ares Pagus, which just means Ares Hill. And because you've watched Wonder Woman, you know that Ares is the Greek god of war, right? And in Roman, it's Mars. So this is where we get Mars Hill, if you ever heard that. And in the Areopagus is where the senators, the guardians of the city's religion, education, morals, all gathered to hear things, right? This is the central hall on the planet at the time. The stage is set. So we've seen what Paul sees, what Paul felt, what Paul did, and we're about to hear what Paul said. As we do, then I'd get the notes ready because Paul is going to school us. He's got some great coaching notes for us. Here we go, verse 22. When you have the opportunity to talk to people who don't have a background in Christianity, don't know much about Jesus, maybe they're friends, maybe they're neighbors, let's look at what Paul does first. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. Paul finds points of agreement. He builds a bridge. He starts with things that he's noticed. Hey, I see that you're very religious, which is a nice way of putting it, right? When a city has 30,000 different gods. He's being courteous. He's not attacking them, but he's building a bridge. Hey, also, I found this inscription that on one of the gods it said to the unknown God. Unknown, agnosis, where we get agnostic. Unknown, and yet there's this shrine to it, right? So in Greek mythology, you've got all this pantheon, right? You've got your god of the sea, your god of fertility, goddess of wisdom, which is Athena, medicine, victory, sleep. You got the god of manure even, okay? Even the goddess of door hinges, okay? And we got the whole gamut here going on. Like, all realms of life are covered. But just in case, we got this miscellaneous category, okay? This is on your multiple choice. This is E, none of the above. And we've got this God that's there for anything that we missed. And Paul capitalizes on that to build a bridge. This is brilliant, right? He's connecting culturally with them. He's even going to quote some of their poets later. Paul starts with where they're at. And everyone has something that they worship. fears, hopes, desires, things that we search and praise and give ourselves to in hopes that they might bring us what we want. We all do it. Athens is no weirder than Oklahoma today. It's just a lot more overt. There were clearer names and temples, but we have our own God substitutes, things that we covet and we crave and we make core to our life. Everything from our kids to pills, to the hope of romance, to sports, our body image, politics, possessions, grandchildren, right? Like you crave the absence of conflict or security or music or the weekend. Even church, right? Ministry can become one of these counterfeit substitutes. Our hearts are factory vitals, is what John Calvin said. We just can't stop cranking them out. It's impossible not to worship because you have something that is in the first place of your heart. You have to. Something that you love higher than anything else. And so that's where he starts. What do you worship? He's going straight to the heart. Now, he's not denouncing it right out of the gate. He's not attacking, right? He's not firing bullets out of the gate. He's first, notice what he's doing. He's affirming the search itself. I love that. We got to do the same, right? Like, hey, I see that you're hoping to encounter real love. Hey, I notice that you're fighting for justice or that you seek out genuine community. I can't help but admire your compassion for those who are hurting, or see that you really care deeply about your children, or that you want rest and relief. And we meet people as they're searching for these things. These are good things, right? They're just not ultimate things. They're not God's. But these things that people are chasing somehow point to the one who is ultimate, who is God. And so let's affirm the end goal that people are looking towards. So find points of agreement. Now next, we don't immediately run to Jesus as the answer. I think a wise strategy first is to expose the deficiency of their answers. We need to ask, hey, how's that working for you? So this is what you're worshiping, but is it working? Well, the very fact that they have 30,000 gods, I think, suggests it's not working, right? It shows the search for satisfaction is unending, and it's a black hole. We're going from one God to another. We sacrifice here, doesn't give me what we want, go to the next. Could it be that when you're addicted to new, it's because that what you have currently isn't good enough anymore? You're searching, right? There's, as John Mayer says, an endless search for everything. I appreciate John Mayer because he's one of the few people who's actually honest about this, right? That something's missing. A lot of his lyrics, a lot of his songs talk about this. Everyone's searching. Just few people actually are honest about it, like him. And so Paul's going to point out the holes in their idols. And as he does it, he's actually going to proclaim the supremacy of God alongside it. He's going to take them together through this. So let's look at what he does. Verse 24. I'm going to proclaim to you the one who's unknown. I'm going to make him known, he says in verse 23. Verse 24, the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man. Okay, here's the God that you're looking for. It's not a pantheon, right? There's not a God for the moons and a God for the mountains. There's one source. There's one source. And if there's one source who's creator and Lord of everything, then the one who made men doesn't live in houses made by men, right? That doesn't make sense. You cannot confine him if he's actually God. You can't limit him. You can't localize him. Because from Saturn to supernovas to Socrates, he made them, so you can't put him in a tent. He's the creator of life, verse 25. Nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives life to all mankind, life, breath, and everything. He's the creator of life. He's also the sustainer. Idols depend on humans to bring them food and sacrifices, to build them shrines. But God is by definition what? Self-sufficient. He doesn't need anything. Which, catch this, he doesn't need you, that means, right? Think about that. He's not waiting on you to up your church attendance before he loves you, or to give to that charity, or to be a better parent before you and him are good. Like, He's not appeased by your works. See, Athens is a city full of transactional relationships with their gods. So is More, by the way. But you cannot barter with God. He's not an ATM. You can't make a deal with him, and nor is he desperate for you to get your act together because you're messing up his plan. God is not a CEO who just wants his worker bees to do all the honey collecting. Okay? That's not him. That's not who our God is. No, he gives himself to all mankind, life and breath and everything. Whoa, hold up. You don't give to God. God gives to you. That is a flip of the script. Because after all, what could you even give to God in the first place? If he's God, what can you give him that he doesn't already have? Name one thing. The bag tag says God. It's his. So whether you recognize it or not, all that you have comes from him. So instead of an idol that takes, and takes, we have a God who gives life. This is totally redefining the concept of God, isn't it? So, creator of life, sustainer of life, verse 26, he's also the sovereign ruler of life, because he made from one man, from Adam, every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. Okay, so all image bearers in spreading his glory, God has been deliberately directing that from the beginning of time. Every lifespan, which is allotted periods, and every location, which is the boundaries of their dwelling place. Every empire, every people group, and every individual down to you and me, he's been orchestrating to what possible end, though? Well, verse 27, that they should seek God in the hope that they might feel their way towards him and find him. Y'all, that's the whole point. Paul's saying the whole point that you are in Athens and that I am in Athens right now in this moment is that you might seek God. That's why you're here today. That's why you're on Zoom. That's why you're at the well. That's why this is happening, why all these different issues in our technology occurred today. All of it is under the orchestration of God, that you might actually seek him. And in seeking him, might feel your way towards him, which is an image of a blind person in the dark kind of feeling about, which kind of sounds weird and odd and a little touchy-feely, what's going on. But really, it's just talking about the attitude of searching. That you would have a heart that wants to know God, because if you search, he says, guess what? You'll find him. Why? Because he's not far off. He's not distant. He's not detached like the Greek gods or the American gods. He's not uninvolved in your life. He's made himself available. And catch this, he's personal. He's knowable. This grand creator God is knowable. And he's so close to each one of us as you are pursuing knowledge and pursuing security and pursuing acceptance and pursuing peace, all these idols. What you're really looking for is him, and oh, you're so close, he's saying. You're so close. He's the substance behind those shadows. And in that is this spectacular invitation for you and me. There's a God to find. He's not hard to find because he's close. Y'all, as Paul lays this out, he's saying God is far bigger than you ever dared imagine. But he's far closer than you ever dared hope. Think about that. He's blowing their concept of God, their gods out of the water. The real creator is far bigger than you could ever dared imagine. But he's far closer than you ever dared hope. Maybe you're feeling that God is distant today, but the reality is it's not him who's distant. It might be us who's distant, but he's right there. You can't feel him, but he's there without you even realizing it. So Paul goes on and he quotes in verse 28, they're poets. He backs this up by saying from their own mouths of their own philosophers these very truths, right? That in him we live and move and have our being, okay? And that we are his offspring. These are the things that he's quoting. Hey, your own people are even saying this and backing this up. And then he takes it a step further in verse 29. He goes back to the source of life and he says, you know what, this creator God, let's use even another term, a term that your own poets use. Let's call him Father. Because that's a close, personal, relational term. As his creation, he formed us. Look at verse 29. He formed us. Therefore, why would you go to something that is lifeless, that is dead, that is formed with gold and silver and stone, he's saying. Think about the backwardness of this, right? A lifeless earthly material crafted by human art and imagination. No, like, we are the ones that he's created. We don't create him. Just think logically about this, Paul is saying. So he's positioned for them the one true God versus the counterfeits. What's deficient versus what's sufficient. And he's saying, hey, you can't localize God to a temple. You can't domesticate him to a pet. You can't alienate him to a stranger. And you can't exchange him for a man-made substitute. No. He's God. So verse 30 then, he begins to crescendo. He's going to steer them towards what he always and what we should always steer them towards, Jesus. Verse 30, the times of ignorance God has overlooked. He's been patient. He's been slow to anger with your idolatry. He's delayed his judgment, but he won't always delay his judgment. Now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he's fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. A fair, just judgment is coming. Reckoning is coming where we will give an account, and there will be no wrong sentences. And the one who will give this judgment is no other than the one who was raised from the dead. And there we have it, the centerpiece of Christianity. That Jesus, in holding the keys to the kingdom, is not just another religious teacher, and he's not just a wise philosopher in the likes of Plato. He's the risen Son of God, who substituted himself for us on a cross and was victorious for us over death. So because of that, there's a call in this passage to repent. Hey, so turn from these worthless, lifeless idols that you're pouring yourself hopelessly into and find the one true living God who's worthy of your worship. Well, as soon as he hits the word resurrection, it is a buzzword for sure. It's the linchpin, and he gets interrupted, and they shut some things down. Verse 32 shows our responses to people from people that some people mocked him, they ridiculed him, said this is foolish. Some people were interested and still seeking, and they just wanted to hear more. And then a third group of people believed. Some joined them, including a council member of the Areopagus. So what we have in this passage today is really we see Paul on display as the sage, the one who's combining rational logic with relational love. And he's surgically bringing his words to bear by exposing the false narrative of the Athenians that they were buying into and delivering at their doorstep the real thing. That's what he wants to do with you. Do you see the links that God is willing to go to, y'all, to meet you where you're at? I mean, even all of this craziness of today to happen, even the technology of today to happen, the fact that you have a Bible in your hands, the fact he's orchestrated your life to this very moment, it's not chance, it's a God who is close. And you go, Tyler, I can't feel God a lot right now. I pray and I don't hear anything. Well, I promise you he's near. Don't stop. You're close. You're close. And he wants to expose the lifeless objects of your worship. And he wants to correct the misconceptions of who he is, that he doesn't need you to serve him. And he doesn't expect you to be in a place where you're not. Oh, thank God, right? I don't expect my 5-year-old to drive or to read even. God doesn't expect you to be someplace where you're not. He meets you where you're at. And he's not far off. Paul was willing to take the gospel truth to people's doorstep. Are we? It's easy, isn't it, to be content in our spiritual bubble. We have what we need on our porch, and so we don't really think about taking care of others because I'm good. Actually, in our economy right now, there's a bit of a problem, and that's that the demand for delivery is disproportionate right now. There's an abundance of demand and not enough infrastructure and deliverers on the backside, which is interesting because isn't that the exact case spiritually? Even Jesus himself said the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. We need more deliverers. People who are moved on the inside to meet others where they are at. So let me just recap for you as you think about radiating the gospel to others, people who you know in your life, maybe even people specifically like the Athenians who really don't know much about Jesus. Think about this progression. Here's what we've seen. Number one, to look closely for what's worshipped. He observed, he learned, far before he ever spoke. He perceived what people's hearts were really after. Number two, he was provoked by the idolatry. His heart was both stirred to anger over God's name being trampled on, but it was also stirred to compassion for those who were going to empty wells, angry over their action, grieved over their condition, compelled by love. Number three, he met people where they are. He went to them. He got in their world. He pursued and engaged culture. He didn't avoid it. And number four, when he opened his mouth, then he found first points of agreement. He built bridges. He affirmed what they were searching for, and he connected with their culture in language that they could understand. And number five, then he began to expose the deficiency of their answers. He helped them see the holes in their hopes. Hey, here's what's working and what's not, and what will never work. Here's where this will leave you empty if it hasn't already. And then in that, he proclaims the supremacy of God. Here's who God is and why he's better, because he alone is all you long for. He alone will satisfy. He alone is all you've searched this world for. And he gives them the gospel. He beelines it for Jesus, doesn't he? His life, his death, his resurrection. I'm sure he was going to go into more detail, but he was cut off. His return and his judgment, his offer of salvation by grace alone, and his call to respond and receive him in repentance and faith. It's not a philosophy, it's the God-man, Jesus Christ. And he's revealed himself, and he's inviting us. And so we have this spectacular invitation that we get a chance to hold out to others. So come, you broken, and come, you wanderer. He is all you need. Come find him. Come, you blind man. Come, you harlot. He is all you need. Come find him. Come, you lost souls. Come, you cheater. Come, you outcast. Come, you Pharisee. Come, you philosopher. Come, you atheist. Come, you church kid. Come, you lonely, and come, you depressed. Come, you anxious. Come, you confused. Come, you restless and ashamed. He is not far off. The God who's bigger than we ever dared imagine is closer than we ever dared hope. He saw our heart, y'all. Here's how we know this to be true with absolute certainty. He saw our heart. As I finish up, he knew what we worshiped. He was provoked by our idolatry. But he was also provoked for our redemption. And in compassion, he didn't immediately condemn us or roll out his wrath on us. He did not forsake humanity, but what did he do? He came to us. To us. In an unparalleled kind of love. He left his home and he stepped into ours. He met us where we were at. If anyone meets people where they're at, it is Jesus. Born in a feeding trough. Raised by a rural carpenter. He walked into the synagogue and he walked into the marketplace. He walked into weddings and into boats and into tax collectors' homes. He rubbed shoulders with beggars, and he put his hands on lepers, and he intervened for prostitutes, and he met Pharisees at midnight. If ever there was a man who spoke on our level and met us where we were at, it is Jesus. He's taken the top shelf down for us, y'all. He didn't just build a bridge, right? He was our bridge. Patiently, perfectly uncovering our hearts in the emptiness of our worship and then showing what's better, making known the one true God. If you want to know God, the Father, see me. And he corrects our wrong views and he helps us see the perfect image of one who has authority, who is Lord over all creation, and yet at the same time desires this personal intimacy. He's the one you can talk to and touch and who has a face, the one you can call him Abba, Father. Far bigger, far closer. And then he purchased that nearness with his own blood. He sealed our salvation that we might draw near to him now. Know the God who is no longer unknown, y'all. That's our Jesus. And I want to invite you to him as we pray and finish up. Whether you are on the outside and exploring Christianity, maybe you're like the Athenians. You love to mix it up with philosophy or something new. But Jesus is stepping into your world today. He's delivering truth to your door right where you're at. He's calling you to respond to him. Don't miss the invitation. Don't mock him. Seek him and search him, because I promise you will find him. He is not far off. And we love to talk more. I'd love for you to hit us up, to text us, look up our church, call us, email us. We'd love to walk with you through what that looks like to respond to Jesus, to be connected into his family, to take the next steps of following him and enjoying him. And maybe you are a believer, but still God feels distant, and you walked in today with some of those things we mentioned at the beginning, but God is meeting you right where you are at right now. He's speaking on your level, and he's saying, hey, what you're really looking for is me. And he wants to remind you of that. Recalibrate you to himself. Let's pray, church, and respond together on our own. Creator God, I thank you. There's no one bigger and higher and mightier than you are. You're so vast, far bigger than anything we could ever fathom. Galaxies are but marbles in your hand. And yet, God, you know us by name and the hairs on our head and the wounds of our past and the struggles of our present. You are not light years or even zip codes away. You are near. We thank you for that. Thank you most importantly for Jesus, the one who's purchased that nearness for us. We ask today, Lord, that you would allow us to draw near to you, to seek, to find, to praise, to have anything wrong about you corrected. And then we ask that you would stir up our hearts, Lord, to not be people who are content in our own provision, but people who are willing now to be laborers in the harvest, to be delivery men and women who would do the due diligence to learn our culture, know what's worshipped, listen to others, be stirred on the inside with love and compassion and a righteous indignation, and take the gospel to them. Would you do that for the sake of your glory, Jesus, in our city? Amen.